Marcus Ellison was 41 years old when he came home from a 12-hour shift on a broken water main to find his wife standing in the kitchen doorway, still in her blazer, smirking at him the way you smirk at someone you have already decided is beneath you. For 11 years, Marcus had been a licensed master plumber, running his own four-man crew out of a beat-up white service van with 200,000 miles on it, and a company name stenciled on the side in letters he'd painted himself. He worked before sunrise and after dark. He drove 30 minutes each way to every job, without complaint. He paid the mortgage on time, put money into a savings account he never touched, and took on a second weekend job doing vac inspections when his wife Diane decided she wanted to pursue her real estate license. He paid for her courses. He paid for her exam fees. He made dinner on the nights she studied. He did not ask for credit. He did not keep score. He did what needed doing and moved on. And then Diane Ellison got her license, took a position at a mid-sized residential brokerage on the north side, and came home one Tuesday evening smelling like someone else's cologne, blazer sharp, smirking, and said, "The guys at the office actually respect me." She had no idea that Marcus had spent the previous 6 weeks having a conversation with an accountant that would leave her with nothing. What happened in the 14 months that followed would cost Diane everything she thought she was building, and earn Marcus everything she never thought to ask about. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The alarm went off at 4:52 a.m. Marcus was already awake. He lay still for a moment in the dark, listening to the particular quiet of the house before it shifted into morning. The faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs. The soft mechanical click of the thermostat adjusting. Outside, the neighborhood was still. He had spent 11 years waking up before the world, and he no longer needed the alarm. But he set it anyway. An old habit, the way some men cross themselves before a job, a ritual of the reliable. He sat up, swung his legs to the floor, and moved through the dark to the bathroom without turning on any lights. He had done this long enough that the floor told him where he was. The slight give of the hallway boards, the cold tile at the bathroom threshold. He brushed his teeth and splashed water on his face and looked at himself for a moment in the mirror in the gray pre-dawn light. The same face, the same eyes. The slight scar under his jaw from a copper fitting that had burst on a commercial job in 2017 that he had never gotten stitched because it wasn't deep enough to slow him down. He dressed in the dark. Work pants, a thermal undershirt, a heavyweight flannel over it, and his Carhartt over that. He checked the inside breast pocket for his notebook, a small spiral-bound thing he'd carried for years, where he kept pipe dimensions, job addresses, supplier codes, and the occasional phone number. It was there. It was always there. Downstairs, he filled his thermos from the coffee he'd set on a timer the night before. Black. He tightened the lid and set it on the counter next to his keys. He looked at the kitchen for a moment. The oak cabinets he had refinished himself 4 summers ago. The backsplash tile he had laid himself on a long weekend when Diane was visiting her sister. He had done most of the work in this house with his own hands, not because they couldn't afford to hire it out, but because he was good at it and it needed doing, and he was here. He picked up his keys and his thermos and went outside. The van was parked at the end of the driveway, white, work-scarred, with a long streak of rust-colored grime along the passenger wheel well that he kept meaning to address. He climbed in and sat for a moment before starting the engine, letting the seat adjust to him, the familiar weight and smell of it. Pipe dope and silicone sealant, and the faint ghost of the fast food bag he had not finished last October. He knew every sound this van made. He knew the tick it produced on cold mornings before the engine settled. He knew the way the steering pulled slightly right on the highway, and the exact pressure needed to compensate. A man spends enough years inside a machine, he stops driving it. He just thinks, and it goes. He pulled out of the driveway and into the gray morning and drove north toward the first job. The crew met at 7 a.m. on Birchwood Court, a residential street 2 blocks from the elementary school, where a main had developed a slow fracture over the winter and finally let go 3 days ago. The homeowner, an older gentleman named Desmond Haas, stood on his front porch wrapped in a quilted vest watching them unload from the van and Marcus's foreman's truck. He looked anxious in the way people looked anxious when they didn't understand what was wrong or how long it was going to take to be right. Marcus walked over to him first. He introduced himself, shook Desmond's hand, and explained in plain language what they were going to do, and in what order and roughly how long each stage would take. He used real words, not trade jargon. He had found over the years that people calmed down fastest when they understood the sequence, not the details. The sequence. When they knew that step 3 came after step 2 and step 4 came after step 3, and that all of it was predictable and under control, their shoulders came down. He left Desmond with his card and went to work. His foreman, a compact, deliberate man named Ray Suarez, who had been with him for 6 years, had already located the shutoff and staged the equipment. Marcus reviewed the site, walked the trench line with Ray, and identified the secondary fracture point that Ray had flagged with orange marking paint. A hairline split 18 inches upstream from the main break that would have opened within 3 months on its own. "We get both today," Marcus said. "Both today," Ray confirmed. It was not a debate, and it was not a question. It was a man doing the job correctly the first time, so that Desmond Haas did not end up back on his porch in 3 months with the same sick look on his face. Marcus did not charge extra for the secondary repair. He built it into the estimate when he saw the site, because the secondary failure was his problem now, whether he acknowledged it or not. And acknowledging it cost Desmond nothing. He worked alongside the crew until early afternoon, moving through the trench work with the practiced ease of a man who had been underground in all weather for 2 decades. His hands knew what they were doing without consulting his mind. He checked every joint himself before they closed the trench. He ran the pressure test twice. When the job was finished, he walked Desmond through the repair, showed him where the main break had been, showed him the secondary fracture they had caught, showed him the new fittings and what to watch for over the next 90 days. Desmond pumped his hand and said he wished he'd called earlier. "You called when you called," Marcus said. "That's when you needed to." He loaded the van, locked it, and drove south toward the second job. He was home by 7:15. Diane's car was in the garage, a silver 4-door she had picked out 14 months ago when she had gotten the job. Her old car had been a Civic with a cracked front bumper that she had never gotten fixed and used to leave in the driveway at an angle that annoyed the neighbor. The new car was precise and gleaming, and she washed it herself on Saturday mornings and kept it that way. Marcus had noticed this. He had noticed the car the way you noticed when someone you knew for a long time began carrying themselves slightly differently. He had told himself it was the job. People got energy from new jobs. People changed their posture when they felt seen. He took off his boots on the back step and went inside. Diane was in the kitchen, still in her blazer, standing at the island scrolling through something on her phone. She glanced up when he came in. "Long day?" she said. Birchwood ran over. "Secondary fracture." She went back to her phone. He washed his hands at the kitchen sink and opened the refrigerator. There was half a roast chicken from 2 nights ago and some leftover rice in a container. He took both out and stood at the counter eating cold chicken without bothering to heat it, because he was tired and hungry and there was no reason to fuss about it. Diane set her phone down on the island. She was looking at him differently than she used to. Not meanly, not yet, but with a particular absence of interest, as if she were looking at a piece of furniture she had grown so accustomed to that it had stopped registering as something present in the room. "The guys at the office took me to lunch today," she said, "to celebrate the Hargrove listing." "Good listing?" "It's a good listing, a beat. They said I have a natural instinct for this." "You do," Marcus said. He meant it. She smiled, but the smile was directed at something private, not at him. "They actually respect me there," she said. "You have no idea what that feels like." He looked at her. She was already looking back at her phone. He finished the chicken and rinsed the fork and went upstairs to shower. He stood under the hot water for a long time, long enough for the heat to get into his hands and his lower back. He did not think about what she had said. Or rather, he thought about it the way he thought about things on a job site. Registered it, filed it, moved on. There would be a time to look at it more closely. That time was not now. He was asleep by 9:30. He would have stayed asleep if he hadn't gotten up at 2 in the morning for a glass of water. The house was quiet. He moved downstairs in the dark, filled a glass at the kitchen sink, and stood drinking it at the counter. The streetlight outside threw a pale orange bar across the kitchen floor through the gap in the curtains. He set the glass down and was about to go back upstairs when he noticed Diane's laptop open on the kitchen table. She must have left it there before bed. The screen had gone dark, but not locked, and when Marcus accidentally nudged the table, it woke. He almost walked away. What he saw stopped him mid-turn. He stood very still. His hand did not move from where it rested on the edge of the table. The screen showed an email thread, open, with the most recent message at the top. The name in the sender field was not a client's name and not a colleague's name. It was a name Marcus had heard once, briefly, mentioned as someone Diane had run into at a networking event 2 months ago. A broker from another firm. Carter Reeves. He did not read quickly. He did not skim. He read slowly, the way he read structural drawings, the way he read pipe diagrams, looking for the thing that was wrong, the thing that would fail later if he didn't find it now. He read for 4 minutes. His stomach did not clench. His hands did not shake. His vision did not blur. None of those things happened. What happened was simpler and worse. Everything became very quiet, very clear, and very still inside him, the way a job site goes quiet in the seconds between a ceiling collapse and the sound hitting you. The emails were not ambiguous. They were not friendly in the way that could be explained or softened. They were from 2 people building something private and deliberate and already well underway. He stood at the kitchen table for a while. Then he picked up his phone from his back pocket, opened the camera, and photographed every email on the screen methodically, one at a time, making sure the sender and recipient fields were fully legible in each frame. He forwarded them to his personal email address and deleted the sent message from his outbox. He set the phone down. He picked up his glass of water and drank the rest of it slowly. He looked at the email thread on the screen for another moment. Then, he nudged the table edge again, the way you might nudge it accidentally if you were just passing through, and the screen went dark. He went back upstairs and lay down in the dark and stared at the ceiling for a long time. Diane was asleep beside him, her breathing slow and even. He listened to it. Outside, a car passed. The refrigerator hummed. The thermostat clicked. He was not crying. He was not raging. He was doing what he had always done when he found the place where something had broken. assessing the full damage before touching anything, making sure he understood what he was actually dealing with before he decided what to do about it. He thought about the Birchwood job. The main fracture was obvious. Everyone could see it. The secondary fracture, the one that would have opened in 3 months, nobody had flagged, because nobody had looked far enough upstream. He had looked, that was all. He had just looked. He fell asleep sometime around 4. He set no alarm. The next morning he let Diane leave first. He drank his coffee slowly at the kitchen island and watched her car back out of the garage and disappear down the street. Then he went upstairs and sat at the small desk in the spare room where he kept his business records and opened his laptop. He was not looking for more evidence. He had enough. He was not looking to confirm what he already knew. He was looking at the larger structure. He was looking the way he looked at a job before he touched it. Full picture, every line, every load point, every connection. What he saw when he looked at their finances carefully was a story he had not been reading closely enough. He had given Diane full access to their joint savings account when she started the new job, because she had needed to pay some upfront costs, and because he trusted her, and because he did not keep score. Over the past 8 months, the account was lower than it should have been. Not obviously, not drastically. Incrementally, the kind of drift that you noticed if you were paying close attention, the kind that explained itself as ordinary spending if you weren't. He pulled up the statements. He went through them line by line. 4,200 here, 3,100 there, a transfer of 6,800. A payment to an account he did not recognize, smaller amounts scattered between. He was not a forensic accountant. He was a master plumber. But he had been managing a small business for 11 years, and he knew how to read numbers, and he knew what a pattern looked like when it was trying not to look like a pattern. He took screenshots. He printed what he could print. He put everything into a new folder on his desktop and named it plainly. Then he made a phone call to a man named Garrett Cole. Garrett Cole was a licensed family attorney Marcus had been referred to 4 years ago by Ray Suarez, whose brother-in-law had used him in an ugly custody matter and said he was the kind of man who came fully prepared and never raised his voice. Garrett had an office on the 2nd floor of a converted brownstone on the east side. Nothing fancy, with 2 chairs across from a large desk covered in files and a single-frame degree from the University of Michigan Law on the wall behind him. He shook Marcus's hand and looked at him the way competent men looked at each other, squarely, without warm-up. Marcus sat down and opened the folder on his phone and talked for 20 minutes. He did not editorialize. He stated what he had seen, in what order, with what documentation. He showed Garrett the email screenshots. He showed him the account statements. He showed him the transaction history. Garrett listened without interrupting. When Marcus finished, Garrett sat back in his chair and said, "You documented all of this before coming to me." "Yes, and you haven't confronted her." "No." Garrett nodded slowly. He picked up a pen and held it without writing anything. "I want you to understand what position you're in," he said. "If what you've shown me is accurate, and it looks accurate, you have a clear case of marital waste. The withdrawals are the bigger issue legally. The rest is grounds, but it's the asset transfers that give you real leverage." Marcus said nothing. He waited. "You have a joint account and she's been making unilateral transfers to a third-party account over 8 months, Garrett said. "That's not disputed in the statements, it's just there. We hire a forensic accountant, we trace where the money went, and we have a full picture before we file a single document." He set the pen down. "I've seen messier than this, and one better." They talked for another 40 minutes. Marcus asked specific questions, and Garrett gave specific answers. Before he left, Marcus wrote a retainer check without hesitation and shook Garrett's hand again and walked back out into the morning. He sat in the van for a moment before starting it. Then he started it and drove to the afternoon job. This was how Marcus Ellison operated, not because he was cold, not because he did not feel what had happened in that kitchen at 2 a.m, but because he had spent 20 years learning that the worst thing you could do when something failed was to react before you understood it. Reaction cost you. Precision saved you. He picked up the phone and called Ray. "Can you cover Thursday's Delwood inspection?" he said. "Sure," Ray said. "Everything okay?" "Working through something. I'll explain later." Okay, that was all. Ray did not push. Marcus did not volunteer. They had worked together long enough that trust did not require narrative. The weeks that followed looked, from the outside, identical to every week before them. Marcus left early. He worked. He came home. He ate dinner. He was pleasant. He did not look at Diane differently, or if he did, she did not notice. She was, by this point, not looking at him very closely at all. She came home later than she used to. She was on her phone more. She mentioned Carter Reeves twice in passing conversation, framed both times as a professional contact, someone who had been helpful with a listing presentation. Her voice when she said the name was practiced in the way of something rehearsed. Marcus listened. He said what seemed natural. He asked 1 or 2 questions in the right places. He did not press. He was not performing normalcy. He was just not finished yet. He had not pulled everything up from the root. He had not yet traced the money to its destination. He did not want to move until he could move completely. He met with Garrett twice more during this period. The forensic accountant Garrett had brought in, a woman named Sandra Voss, who worked out of a nondescript office near the financial district, and who had the particular flat-eyed calm of someone who spent her professional life reading lies in columns of numbers, had finished tracing the transfers. The destination was a joint account in 2 names. One was Diane Ellison. The other was Carter Reeves. 41,200 and change. Over 8 months. Not a fortune. But it was theirs. It was the savings account Marcus had been adding to since 2 years into the marriage. The account he had called the buffer, the thing you didn't touch unless the business had a bad quarter or someone needed a hospital. Sandra had the documentation in clean order. Dates, amounts, account routing numbers, transfer confirmations. Everything, Garrett said. We're ready. There was a man in Marcus's business life named Howard Elliott, no relation, who had been a mentor of sorts since Marcus was in his mid-20s working as a journeyman under a plumbing contractor on the South Side. Howard had built a mid-sized mechanical contracting company over 30 years from nothing, sold it, and was now retired in the comfortable, still busy way of men who did not know how to stop working entirely. He played golf twice a week and consulted occasionally on commercial bids. He had known Marcus since Marcus was 26 years old and had been watching him build his company from the beginning. Howard also sat on the board of a regional property development consortium, a quiet entity that pooled investor capital for commercial and industrial acquisitions. He had invited Marcus twice over the years to present as a potential vendor. Marcus had done competent, thorough work for 2 of the consortium's properties over the past 4 years. No one outside that relationship knew this. Marcus had not mentioned it to Diane because it had never come up in a way that required mentioning. It was a business relationship, not a windfall. He did not discuss every job. But the consortium had recently acquired a significant stake in a mixed-use commercial corridor on the city's expanding northeast side. a corridor that a number of residential brokerages, including Diane's, were tracking for listing opportunities. It was, in the language of the industry, a coming market. People who moved early would do well. Marcus had been in the room, quietly, for 2 years. He had not announced this. He had not worn it. He had simply been there, reliable and precise and good at what he did, and Howard Elliott had introduced him at the right moments to the right people. And Marcus had built relationships the way he built everything else, slowly, with his hands, making sure each joint held before he moved to the next. He did not think about this in the context of what Diane had done. He had not sought it out as a weapon. He simply knew that when Garrett filed, the full picture of his financial position would be visible to the court, and the full picture was larger than Diane had ever thought to inquire about. She had not asked. Not once in 11 years had she asked to look at the business accounts. She knew he had a crew. She knew there was a van. She knew he worked long hours. She had told her friends that Marcus was a plumber, the way you might tell someone a man was a librarian, accurately, but without the full sentence. Garrett filed on a Thursday morning. Marcus was on a job when the papers were served. He had arranged it that way deliberately. He did not want to be home. He did not want to see her face when it happened, not from cruelty, but because he was not interested in the scene that would follow. He had left a message with Ray to cover the back end of the afternoon and had given himself the evening to sit still. He drove to his mother's house after the job. She was 71 and lived alone in the same house Marcus had grown up in, a sturdy brick 2-story on a narrow street where she had planted the same garden every spring for 30 years. She was in the kitchen when he arrived, a cup of tea on the table in front of her, a book face down beside it. She looked at him when he came in and said nothing, because she could tell from the way he walked through the door that he needed to sit before he needed to talk. He sat. She made him a cup of tea he did not drink and waited. He told her everything, not dramatically, in the same sequential, factual way he told Garrett, but with more of the pauses in between. His mother listened with her hands around her cup and her eyes on him, and did not interrupt. When he was finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Did she ever ask you?" she said carefully. "About the consortium? About Howard?" "No," his mother nodded. She looked at her tea. "In 11 years?" "No." She looked up at him. "She built a picture," she said. "And then she lived inside that picture for 11 years and never once thought to check if it was real." Marcus said nothing. "Move carefully," his mother said. "And move completely." He stayed for 2 hours. She fed him a bowl of soup, and they watched part of a news program together without commenting on it. When he left, she walked him to the door and put her hand on his arm for a moment, briefly, firmly, and then let him go. The discovery phase of the divorce proceedings was where things became specific. Garrett filed the full financial disclosure on Marcus's behalf, which included his business accounts, his vendor relationship with the consortium, the outstanding equity in a small commercial property in the city's warehouse district that Marcus had purchased as a business asset 6 years ago and had been renting to a storage company at a modest but consistent yield. None of these were hidden. They were simply assets that existed because Marcus had built them carefully over time and had never felt the need to display them. Diane's attorney, a man named Fuller, aggressive and well-dressed, who spoke in the slightly too confident register of someone who had won a lot of cases against people who were not prepared, called Garrett the morning after the disclosure. The call lasted 11 minutes. Garrett recounted it to Marcus the next day in his office, in his usual flat and precise way. He had assumed, Garrett said, that the asset base was the van and the joint account. Marcus waited. He seemed surprised, Garrett said, without inflection. How surprised? Sufficiently, Sandra Voss had valued the commercial property at market rate. The consortium relationship had documented vendor equity that had accrued over the two commercial projects. The business itself had been independently assessed. The total picture was not extravagant. But it was orderly, documented, and substantially larger than Fuller had built his case around. The $41,000 in transferred funds, which Diane's attorney had evidently planned to characterize as informal household management, was now framed by Garrett as marital waste, with complete documentation of timing, destination, and the nature of the receiving account. Fuller's tone, Garrett said, had shifted in the last 4 minutes of the call. The mediation was scheduled for the following month. Marcus did not need to attend every stage. He showed up when Garrett told him to show up, answered what he was asked to answer, and was otherwise not visible. He was working. He was on job sites at 5 in the morning. He was managing his crew. He was responding to Howard Elliott's messages about the Northeast Corridor project and attending a site walkthrough on a Tuesday afternoon that had nothing to do with his personal life and everything to do with where his business was going. He was not waiting for the reversal. He was not counting down to the moment when the math became visible to people who had not done the math. He was just working. The same work he had always done. Diane appeared at the mediation meeting in a suit Marcus had not seen before. She looked composed in the particular way of someone who has rehearsed composure and is concentrating on maintaining it. She did not look at Marcus directly when they entered the conference room. Fuller was beside her, already talking quietly in her ear. The room was on the 7th floor of a building downtown. Plain conference table. Chairs on both sides. A neutral mediator at the head. The view was of the street below. Marcus sat down across from Diane. He had the leather folio Garrett had given him, unnecessary, but habitual. He adjusted it on the table in front of him. He looked at Diane. She was looking at the mediator. Fuller led with the argument he had prepared before he knew what he was dealing with, which was a diminished version of the argument he had planned before Garrett filed the disclosure. It was less confident than it had been designed to be. Garrett listened to all of it, and then, without theatrics, laid out the financial picture in the same sequence he had walked Marcus through weeks ago. The business valuation, the property, the consortium equity, the documented transfers, the forensic account tracing. He said all of it quietly. He did not raise his voice. The room was quiet when he finished. Diane's face had changed. Not dramatically. Small shifts. The kind that happened when the image you had been holding in your mind was quietly replaced by the actual thing. Fuller leaned toward her and said something low. She did not respond. The mediator went through the numbers. The final settlement was not complicated. There was an asset to divide that was considerably larger than Diane had believed, and there was documented waste that offset her claim on a portion of it. The transferred funds were addressed directly. The business was Marcus's, fully, the way it had always been. He had founded it before the marriage, and had simply grown it during. The commercial property was his business asset. The consortium equity was assessed and allocated. The joint accounts were divided according to what remained after the documented waste. When it was done, Diane looked at Marcus across the table. It was the first time she had looked at him directly in the room. He returned the look. He did not say anything. There was nothing he needed to say. Everything he had needed to say was in the documents stacked in front of Garrett. He had been precise. He had been thorough. He had looked far enough upstream to find every fracture before he closed the trench. He stood. He adjusted his jacket. He picked up the folio. He walked out. He did not wait for her response. He did not look at Fuller's face. though he was aware of it. He walked through the conference room door and down the corridor to the elevator and pressed the button and waited for the doors to open. He stepped inside and rode down to the lobby alone. Outside, the afternoon sun came through the glass doors at an angle, making the polished lobby floor glow briefly orange and gold. He pushed through the doors and stood on the sidewalk for a moment. People moved past him in both directions. A cab horn sounded down the block. He called Ray. "You free Thursday morning? What time?" "6. I'm free," Ray said. "Delwood still needs the re-inspection." "I know it does. Meet me there." He put the phone in his pocket and walked to where he had parked the van. There it was, white, work-scarred. The rust-colored streak along the passenger wheel well, 200 and some thousand miles in going. He unlocked it and climbed in and sat for a moment with his hands in his lap, listening to the city around him. A bus passed. Somewhere close, a jackhammer started, ran for a few seconds, stopped. He started the engine. He had dinner that night at his mother's house. She had made a roast, and she did not ask him how it had gone until after the dishes were cleared. When he told her, she listened, and then she sat back and looked at her tea and said, "Good," one word. That was all. It was the right amount. Diane's trajectory over the following months was not something Marcus followed closely. He heard things through Ray, who heard things through a contact who worked in the same building as Diane's brokerage. She had stayed at the firm, but her position had shifted. There had been questions, evidently from colleagues, about the nature of her relationship with Carter Reeves, whose professional reputation had not survived close examination of his finances, which the court proceedings had made relevant. Carter had resigned from his firm before anyone could ask him not to. He had moved to a city 3 hours away. Diane was still selling houses. She was good at it. Marcus believed this genuinely. She was sharp, and she presented well, and she had instincts. But the version of her future she had been building in secret, the one that required someone else's resources and someone else's absence, had not materialized. What she had taken was gone. What she had left was a job and an apartment, and the reputation she still had to work back toward in a firm where people now knew the full story of her last year. Marcus heard this and felt nothing in particular about it. Not satisfaction, not sorrow. Just the same flat recognition he felt when he closed out a job. The work was done. The system held. The thing that had been broken was accounted for. He moved into a rental in a neighborhood 6 blocks from his mother's house while he looked for a property. He found one 2 months later, a narrow 2-story on a dead-end street. Older construction, solid bones, badly maintained. The previous owner had let it drift for years. The kitchen was wrong. The floors needed addressing. The front porch had been replaced poorly and was going to need to come down and go back up. He made an offer. It was accepted. He started with the porch. He took it down himself on a Saturday morning with a reciprocating saw and a pry bar and sorted the salvageable lumber from the rest. He worked until the light was gone and came back Sunday. By mid-afternoon, the frame was up for the new deck, and he stood back and looked at it and adjusted one board slightly and looked again. Better. He was in the kitchen the following week, measuring for the cabinet run, when his phone rang. It was Howard Elliott. "The northeast corridor is moving faster than we thought," Howard said. "We've got 3 anchored tenants on the south end. I want to talk to you about the mechanical scope." "What's the scale?" Howard told him. Marcus wrote the numbers in his notebook. He looked at them for a moment. "I'll come in Thursday," he said. "Good," Howard said. "And Marcus, there's a broker at the table who's been asking about you. The consortium name keeps coming up in their presentations. I think you should know that." Marcus thanked him and hung up. He went back to measuring the cabinet run. Outside, the October light came through the kitchen window at a low angle, warm and particular. The kind of light that came only at this time of year in the late afternoon, when the sun was dropping but not gone. It lay across the kitchen floor in long rectangles, touching the original wood he had not yet touched, wood that had been there since before he owned the house. He would sand it. He would seal it. He would get it back to what it had been before someone had covered it over and let it drift. He measured twice. He wrote the number down. That was how everything went forward now, one measurement at a time, both careful and certain, the way it had always gone, when it was done right. He had never needed to announce himself. He had never needed to display what he had. He had simply built, year after year, with precision and patience, and the quiet confidence of a man who knew what he was doing and did not need the room to acknowledge it. She had looked at him for 11 years and seen the van and the thermos and the work pants and the long hours and the used furniture and the modest car and the man who made dinner on the nights she studied, and she had decided, somewhere in the middle of that she knew exactly what he was, and that it was not enough. She had never asked what else there might be. She had never once thought to look upstream. He capped his pen. He put the notebook back in his breast pocket. He picked up the tape measure and moved to the next wall. He did not look back. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.